Hello, everyone. This is Josh Bersin, and welcome to the pandemic economy. What I'd like to do today is give you some perspectives on how the world has changed and what this really means for business, the economy, culture, and of course, HR. And as most of you know, we are now 7 to 8 months into the pandemic, but prior to that, we all lived through a 12-year economic growth cycle starting from the 2008 financial meltdown. And during that period, the economy became increasingly heated. The unemployment rate went well down, well below 4%, which is sort of a lifetime low. And people were worried about workforce transformation from digital technology and robotics, income inequality, and actually anxiety was fairly high. And then of course, the pandemic started and we all went into shock around February and basically realized what had happened. But what we now know coming into October and November of 2020 is that this is not just a global pandemic. This is a global transformation, a transformation of companies, products, services, and society. And let me give you some context on that. First of all, in terms of what's been going on inside of companies, it's really been a four-stage response. The first is understanding where the virus is and how the outbreak has occurred, responding to that, sending people home, or creating new protocols for work, trying to return to the workplace, which is happening in a very asymmetric way. Some organizations have fully returned, many have not, and a lot of companies are still struggling with working at home, to be honest. And then the biggest of all, which is transforming how you go to market, what you sell, who you sell to, and the nature of the jobs that you need to create the new economy. For example, a large bank in the Midwest shut down 80% of their branches, about 75,000 person bank, and had to move 35,000 people into new roles in call centers, and they needed new skills and capabilities to handle those jobs. And that happened over a period of months. Now, as the 12-year growth cycle occurred, what really was happening in digital transformation of business was not the increasing need for software engineers, which did happen, but that's a relatively small trend. It was really the change of the entire economy to be a service economy. 85 to 90% of the US stock market is now based on intangibles. And actually the stock market is trading at almost 3 times the size of the GDP, which is the highest multiple it has ever been. And the reason for that, and of course we have 5 tech companies now making up 23% of the S&P 500. So all of this intangible assets, which are embedded in the value of your companies, are people. It's software, it's services, it's brand, it's relationships, it's the information and the data that you capture over many, many years to solve different problems in different parts of your marketplace. And that means when people are upset, you don't really have a company. And so what's happened this year is the issues of well-being, mental health, physical health, safety have moved out of the HR department, out of the compensation department, and landed in the boardroom and in the CEO's desk. And so these issues of how we keep people focused and well and productive at work are central. And one of the things that we've all learned about this is the role of psychology. I had the opportunity this year to spend several hours with Martin Seligman, the father of positive psychology. And Marty's research includes studying 1 million soldiers in the Army who went through various forms of stress and understanding what causes PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And what he found is basically there's a bell curve of responses to stress. There's people on the left who struggle a lot. There's people on the right who don't notice what's going on. And then there's people in the middle who are significantly interrupted, and most of us are in that middle segment. And he found that there's really 3 things that move you from the left to the right. The first, of course, is to minimize trauma, and that's about building a safe workplace, quickly identifying any outbreaks that you might have in your company, dealing with issues of harassment or abuse inside the workforce or at home, that people are dealing with to immediately deal with those problems. But the second is optimism, giving people a plan and a vision for the future, not making stuff up, but giving them a really realistic plan for where the company is going and where their jobs are going. And one of the ways to do that is to refocus your company on your mission, your purpose. Why does your company exist? And it's not to make money. There's something else you're doing that is actually making money. And many times you can go back to the roots of the company when it was founded, and you can find that mission. And that is what inspires people to power through these sort of ambiguous times. And the third thing he talks about is a little bit of fun, good cheer, telling a joke, playing some music, do a little dancing, have a cooking class, yoga class. You know, one of the big oil companies created an employee resource group called Dogs at Chevron, so people could share pictures of their dogs. So these are the things that we're all learning. And as an HR professional, what I remind you is that there's really two sides to the issue of sustainable performance. At the individual side, people are incredibly resilient. And I think what you're seeing this year is that when we give people the right experience at work, a place that's productive and safe, and they have good relationships and they understand how to get things done, they will strap in and do amazing things. And that is part of human nature and really part of the human animal. Organizations, not so much. We have to simplify and streamline the organization, which has happened a lot this year. Get rid of bureaucratic processes or simplify things like performance management, which comes up a lot. Deeply focus on skills and capability, and make sure that we're not too centralized. And this is a big issue in HR, is building a distributed, coordinated HR function that can operate in asymmetric ways around the world with a high degree of coordination. And that's really the new operating model for HR. On the other side of it, of course, is what are we going to do about the employee experience, which is a massive topic. And, you know, before the pandemic, during the 12-year growth cycle, you know, basically you guys were piling on everything. Free lunch, commute allowance, perks, well-being programs, bonuses, recognition programs. You can read these things. And I think they were mostly being used as recruiting tools because in most bigger cities, at least, there was a really shortage of people. And so these were perceived as employee experience tools, but to some degree, they were mostly for recruiting. Now what we really have is a totally different focus. We're focused on the lower level of Maslow's hierarchy and on the things that will actually make work safe first, and then positive and constructive and developmental second. And this, of course, has been a massive change for all of you in HR and where you spend your time, how much more closely you're working with IT and finance and legal and safety and outside agencies in different parts of the world to make sure that you can implement these protocols. But most of you have done it amazingly fast, and I think you all know that. I mean, just last night I was on the phone with the head of HR with a network of 2,000 eye care centers, and they developed an entire protocol for optometry and eye care where the doctor's standing really within only a few inches of your face that is completely safe. And their employees and their customers feel very, very safe about it. In terms of how you manage employee experience, you know, it's a complicated topic and I won't spend a lot of time on it here, but every element of the employee experience in these little clouds has two dimensions. There's the dimension of where it fits in the on the left axis, which is the, you know, sort of the hierarchy of Maslow's needs. Is it a core set, you know, sort of hygiene factor, or is it really an inspiration and mission and belonging factor? And then on the bottom, who's responsible for it? And HR is not responsible for all of these issues. And so the new world of employee experience isn't just about HR doing nice things for people. It's about us segmenting the workforce, looking at these various different areas and making sure we have assigned owners in clarity of how we're going to listen and respond when people have issues in these different areas. So it's become complex, but it's more important than ever. Now, in terms of, you know, what we can really do to respond during this particular period, and I think we're going to be going through this next year too, we just completed a fairly large study of 1,400 companies, asking them what they did in response to the pandemic. And we have had a series of working groups now for the last 9 months, a week, every week, with 350 companies, talking about what different companies are doing. And we took all of those practices, about 60 things, and we put them into a massive survey and asked companies in a larger scale how well they were implementing these things and what kind of outcomes they were seeing. And we correlated that up, and we found that companies essentially fall into 4 categories. At the bottom are organizations that are just trying to hang on and stay in business. And then at level 2 are companies that are primarily focused on workforce safety. And this is to some degree the healthcare industry. Honestly, the healthcare industry has actually to some degree transformed through online digital health. But for the most part, people are still coming into hospitals doing many of the same jobs they had before, just dealing with different situations and different kind of workload. And then at level 3 are companies that really focused on creating a much more agile, adaptable organization. Pepsi is a good example of this. Sainsbury's is a good example of this. Target is a good example of this, where they really allowed a significant amount of organizational redesign, cross-functional work, and simplified the performance management process. And then at level 4 are companies like US Bank and others that went through massive transformations, Sabre, the airlines, where they really had to take people and put them in totally different jobs. And you can see the percentage of companies there and how the industries stack up. Some industries transform more easily. The industries at the top of the list are actually industries where they've been through this kind of thing before. At the bottom are industries that are just a little less suited and comfortable and familiar with these kinds of situations. Now, when you get under the covers of the data, we discovered there were 10 of the 55 practices that specifically correlate with high levels of performance. And let me just briefly touch on what they are. On the left are all the issues of health and well-being, creating a great focus on safety and health, very carefully listening to the workforce on what they need, daily, weekly stand-up calls, surveys, lots of open communication about what's happening and what help they need in all aspects of their job, including work at home, and creating a strong support for people's family lives. The barriers between work and home and family have completely disappeared this year. And so companies that are high-performing companies are much more flexible and patient and understanding about what people's family issues are, not just their personal work issues. In the middle, in terms of agility and change, there's really 3 things. The first is focusing on purpose and mission. And I cannot tell you enough how important this is. You will see enormous levels of energy and inspiration and flexibility come out of reinforcing why you're here and what you're trying to do for society, especially now. The second is creating tools and systems and allowing cross-functional teams to spin up and operate quickly without having to do everything perfectly, which you've all done in HR. And the third is quickly adopting technology in an adaptive way, which means taking the software you have and using it for new things. And this is why Zoom and Teams and Workplace by Facebook and other open platforms, ServiceNow, are so popular, because they're really like development tools that you can use for many things, not just off-the-shelf applications. On the right, the transformation practices are first hiring quickly where needed, often digitally and using video interviewing and other tools for digital recruitment, heavily using contingent and part-time workers where needed, and that's now become a mainstream part of work. It isn't a sideline anymore. Allowing teams to experiment and letting people go to market with solutions that aren't finished and delivering them in an iterative way so they're continuously being improved, and completely simplifying the performance management process. We've had a lot of companies tell us they have either skipped the process this year or made pay more equal and fair as business goals are unclear, or radically reduced the number of steps. One company told us they reduced a 7-step talent review process, which they'd had for decades, down to 1 to respond to the pandemic. In terms of the employee experience market, How do you listen to employees? We've moved from a world of annual surveys to a world of pulse surveys, intelligent action plans, and now really response platforms. And that's really what the new generation of HR tech is all about, is listening to employees and getting the information you need and then sending it to the right person through a case management system or a trigger inside of a survey so that the manager or HR or IT or facilities or safety or legal, whoever it may be, gets the information they need. And this is critical in a time of badly needed adaptability and trust. And the other thing that's of course happening is HR is becoming agile, lowercase a. You know, there's a lot of books and articles and consulting firms teaching you about the agile methodology. Well, I think most of you became agile this year without reading a lot of books. Cross-functional teams come together with business units, design and develop a solution in weeks, not months, roll it out in an iterative way, improve it, listen, continuously monitor your customers, which might be your employees, and make the solution better. And in many ways, what's happened in HR is we're becoming like product managers, where we are constantly looking at what our customers need and iterating on our solutions or our products in a solution orientation, as opposed to building a program that we roll out, teach people how to use, and essentially force them to use. You know, and the tech industry, of course, has adapted tremendously. I think the most significant change in the tech industry now is that we're spending so much time on Zoom and Teams and on our computers that we need front-end systems that are really easy to use. And so the HR tech market, which is a pretty big space, and I have a long speech on that at the HR Tech Conference you can go see, has become much more adaptive. And many of the HR tech tools are now moving into configurable workflow tools that make them easy for you to build new applications, new training programs, roll out new information, monitor people, schedule offices, get people's temperature tested, and so forth. And that is really becoming a massive change in the tech market. In fact, I really think the significant thing going on in HR tech is we're moving from a standalone world of technology for HR to a world of technology for work that also does HR and interfaces with the back end traditional HR systems. The final thing I want to kind of wrap up on is maybe the biggest topic of all, the topic of trust. Now, I know a lot of you are compensation and benefits people, heads of HR. You know, if you look at the economy and the society we live in today, it's very odd. The Edelman Research Group out of the Edelman PR firm does a massive amount of research on trust. And in the most recent study, only a few weeks old, they found that in the United States, only 13% of Americans trust that the US federal government knows what it needs to do about the pandemic. You know, pretty frightening. And when you ask a similar question about income inequality and wages and jobs, it's about 15%. Ask about the environment and global warming, it's about 18%. Ask about racial injustice, disparities in treatment of human beings based on race, it's even lower. We are in a world where not only do we have the risk and uncertainty of the pandemic, but we have a really crisis of trust in public institutions. And we have an election coming up, which people aren't sure they trust either. So what's happening, according to the Edelman research, and this is completely logical if you think about it, is every consumer, every employee, every citizen is saying, I'm worried about my health. I'm worried about my income and my earnings and my job. I'm worried about the environment. Out here in California, we've got fires like I've never seen before. And I'm worried about diversity and inclusion for me as an individual and for my community. So who's taking care of those things? Well, maybe my employer will be a place to go for safety in these areas. And so what the Edelman research shows is that people are saying, I'm only going to buy products from companies that I trust, that do these things well. And so the issues of environmental sustainability, paying of fair wages, taking care of the environment, ESG, they're not just branding things anymore. They're not just things to put on your website and win a couple of awards. They're really essential to your brand in serving customers and, of course, attracting and retaining employees. And so I would leave you with that. Now, what is trust relative to HR? I'll tell you, after thinking about it and talking to a lot of companies, I think trust comes down to three things. The first, competence, doing a good job, taking care of people, having quality products, paying people on time, paying them a fair wage, giving them a sense of transparency that you're doing things well. If the airline's late, you don't trust it. Doesn't matter how nice they are. If the flights aren't on time, you don't trust it. The second aspect of trust is ethics. And this is where we get into fair pay, diversity and inclusion, transparency, and all of the talent and pay practices that make sure people know that they are treated fairly. And people know how much they're getting paid, and they know how much other people are getting paid. So this directly relates to what you do in the compensation and benefits part of the company. And the third aspect of trust is listening. We don't trust organizations that don't listen. That's one of the reasons we don't trust the federal government, frankly, is, we don't really know who's making decisions back there, to be honest. And so one of the really critical parts of pandemic response, and it was in the 10 practices, is really listening. CEOs getting on Zoom calls, having open stand-up meetings, teaching leaders and managers and supervisors how to spend more time with their people when they're online, and to check in with people more regularly and listen and create a sense of psychological safety in the workforce so people can listen and speak up. Relative to HR, it's a transformational time. One of the things I've discovered over the last few years as I've been rolling out our academy is that really HR is becoming a center of innovation. We are not just a place to roll things out and deploy software. We have to come up with creative solutions that are relevant to our company. When I first became an analyst, people used to say to me, how does GE do this? Well, you can't copy GE anymore. I'm not sure anybody would. You need to figure out what's right for you. And that means that you as an organization have to understand what's going on. We've been doing research on the capabilities and skills of you in the HR function. And what we found is across the 4 levels of organizations I showed you earlier, the companies at level 3 and level 4 are not only doing great things for the workforce, they're doing great things for you guys. They're investing in the capabilities and connections and relationships and constant skilling of HR. And so I would encourage you to make sure you're taking care of yourself and that you're carefully looking at your operating model. One of the things that comes out of the research is that what gets in the way of great HR solutions is people stuck in silos. You need to figure out how to create a more agile operating model in HR, and we have plenty of tools to help you do that. Finally, just to remind you, your role in HR is to be what I call a full stack professional. Yes, you need to understand the fundamental principles of the HR practices, but you also need to be a consultant. You need to understand the industry and the margins and the competitors and the products that your company sells. You need to understand data and technology, and you need to understand how to be a great leader and how to interact with leaders. So let me wrap it up there, and let me just thank you for joining me today. It is a really exciting time, and I hope this was an educational introduction to what's going on. And of course, I would love to talk to any of you about what's going on inside your company. Thank you.